Welcome to our Saturday Simulcast. Sunday version is talking with Brian Neubert and Tom Dienhart. I want to thank our sponsor, the Union Club Hotel, the 811 restaurant, the Boiler Up Bar. We appreciate all their support and everything that they've meant to us throughout the course of the season. This will be our, obviously, with the happenings of Friday night and Purdue's departure from the NCAA tournament. We'll hit a little bit of that today. We'll talk a little bit of the future of Purdue basketball, what may be next, and spring football. Tom Dienhart has been on top of that. Jeff Brown had a press conference after a scrimmage on Saturday. So, Brian, obviously, so shocking is the right term. I don't think there's any other way to say that. And you said that in your headline on the site with respect to Purdue's loss to St. Peter's. Now that you have at least, I don't know, 36 hours since that's transpired, and watched or at least paid attention a little more to the NCAA tournament. Any changes in perspective? Which obviously disappointing end of the season. That's stating the obvious.
Well, given the amount of time I've spent dealing with Philadelphia public transportation here, it seems like it's been about 2 months. No, I mean that was what Purdue's been all season. They turned the ball over too much, they beat themselves too much, and that's precisely what happened. I mean, that was always an outcome that was on the table. I never would have thought that it would happen against St. Peter's, but I think that everything that happened, or I should say nothing that happened that undid Purdue on Friday night in the Sweet 16 really should come as a shock, because the common denominator among most of Purdue's losses this season has been the fact this team never valued the basketball, never valued possessions to the level it needed to. Obviously, this never became a really, really good defensive team. I think for the last 6 weeks, they've been a lot better, but better has been relative. And I think that final 5 minutes of the game where you can't keep St. Peter's off the foul line was kind of more of the same. So whether it was St. Peter's you're losing to in the NCAA tournament, whether it was Duke you're losing to in the NCAA tournament, the way Purdue lost was always a potential outcome for this team, because that's what they've been all season.
Yeah.
I don't know, Brian. We've seen a loss to a double-digit Arkansas Little Rock team. We saw a loss to a double-digit North Texas team. Now we've seen a loss to a double-digit St. Peter's team. There's a lot of disappointment among the fan base, as you can imagine. Did you think, I guess broad picture wise, do you think the way Matt Painter constructs his team is the correct way? Still going with I guess more of a, for lack of a better term, a big man centric offense? Well,
you still won 29 games this year. I mean,
I understand.
It's not like this was, Northwestern. There are challenges to playing as big as you play. There are a lot of challenges to playing as big as you play. When you play that big, you need your big guys against teams like St. Peter's. You need those guys to be absolutely efficient. You need them to dominate. And, only using Friday night as our reference point here in terms of what we're talking about, because that's obviously the most important game right now. Outside of a couple of stretches from Travion Williams, I just don't think you got the level of productivity. The Big Ten tournament title game was the same way. When you have a matchup advantage there, that's got to be maximized to the absolute nth degree. And, Zach Edey turning the ball over 5 times. I didn't think he had his best game, obviously, even though he's 5 for 7 for, however many points he had. I thought Travion Williams had some good moments, but these are games where you need that 13 for 25 for 40 points between the two of them type of game. Given all you give up on defense, sometimes having to play as big as you play, things like that. The thing is that's not the reason, Purdue's ceiling in the postseason was not as high as it probably should have been. The problem was this team just turned the ball over all season. And they say that guards win in March. And obviously, it was a situation that Purdue just turned the ball over too much all across the board. Obviously, Jaden Ivey didn't have his best game in the final. Purdue was betrayed by the three-pointer again in the second half. And, you live by the 3, you die by the 3. If those two things are different, we're not talking about the, construction of Purdue's roster here in terms of them playing big. That being said, there are challenges you have to overcome, and you have to do it with a high level of guard play in addition to having those those advantages around the basket. But no, I don't think I think that Purdue, years ago made a needed step toward more offensive-minded personnel, more offensive skill, and that's taken them a long way. I think the big guys have been part of that. But ultimately, I think it's those guards' decision-making that matters above all else, because the only thing that mattered for this team, the difference between being a really good team and being an elite team, winning 29 games and winning 35 games, winning a Big Ten title, winning a Big Ten tournament title, maybe going to a Final Four, was turnovers. That is really the only thing that matters. Even if Purdue had been a very mediocre defensive team all year long, but just taking care of the basketball, you're looking at a team that's in a very, very different place than it ended up being in.
All year, Brian, all year you said turnovers. Why didn't it never got better? How come it never got better?
I don't know. That this team had a pretty, short window. It didn't really have all that much time in the grand scheme of things to grow together, and that window's now closed because you're obviously going to lose some guys. I think some guys were just wired a certain way. I think part of the issue was, instead of having one centralized focal point offensively, where you let that focal point do its thing and you eat whatever turnovers have to come with that, you had two of them. So when you have a scoring guard who you need to be as aggressive as possible, you're going to have to live with some turnovers. But also, when you play through the post as much as you do, you're going to have to live with some turnovers. You just needed those guys to be as good as they possibly could have been, taking care of the basketball, understanding, hey, we're going to have to eat 10 turnovers a game just from those two sources of offense. But then everybody else had to do a really good job taking care of the basketball. When you look at the team that almost went to the Final Four a couple of years ago, it was built around Carson Edwards. It was built to a lesser extent around Ryan Klein. What you were able to do was just let Carson Edwards go do his thing, almost like he's on an island. And then everybody else took ultimate care of the basketball. You had your Grady Eiferts, you had your Ryan Kleins, you had your, Joe Eastern did a pretty good job taking care of the basketball on very low usage. Purdue just didn't turn the ball over very much around Carson Edwards. And they were a really good offensive rebounding team. So when you took those two things into account, you generally had X number more possessions than your opponent per game. So you could basically write off whatever you had to live with Carson Edwards' aggressiveness. This is probably getting very boring here. You could just write off Carson Edwards' aggressiveness as the cost of doing business. This team didn't have that. You had to eat turnovers from Jaden Ivey. You had to eat turnovers from Zach Edey and Travion Williams as the cost of doing business. And you just didn't make up the difference anywhere else. Everybody else had to be almost perfect on this team. But that being said, I just think there was a mentality with this team too, where, and I think it was conditioned very early on. I think them having as much offensive success as they had in November, I don't think that set a great tone for this team, because they didn't have to condition themselves to win differently. When you turn the ball over in November, it was all right. We will just bury that turnover in three-pointers. That turnover might be the difference between 84 and 86 points. It was, I think that conditioned this team a certain way. And I said that at the time that, hey, what's going to happen when this team can't just outscore everyone, when this team isn't making 12 threes in a game, or when they're not scoring 85 points. And as soon as you went to Rutgers, you found out. And then when Wisconsin came to Mackey Arena, you found out. And then when you went to Bloomington, you found out. And that's why Purdue ended up in the situation it ended up in.
You look at, and it's an interesting study, and probably will be an interesting study for a long time in terms of what happened. And we understand the one-off nature of the NCAA tournament and the randomness that we've talked about. I know Jay Billis and the ESPN crowd, and to some extent the great Charles Barkley, took offense at Purdue's lack of aggressiveness offensively against St. Peter's. maybe pointed mostly at Jaden Ivey in terms of the ability to, race up and down the court and create stuff. I thought going back and looking at it, St. Peter's did a hell of a job of kind of just forcing Purdue, and Ivey didn't have his best game. And what do you say to that notion of that Purdue kind of didn't do the things it had to do from an offensive standpoint? I know they turned the ball over, but outside of that, is that forever entwined with what fell short on Friday night?
Yeah, I thought real time that St. Peter's backcourt pressure slowed them down a little bit, took a couple of seconds off the clock, got them a little bit out of rhythm early on. They didn't attack it as much as they attacked some of Iowa's traps through the course of the year, things like that. They didn't really get any offense off of it. I don't think they turned the ball over because of it, but I don't think they got anything off of it. So I think it was kind of a net loss for Purdue in that sense. But it's hard to turn the ball over 15 times without being aggressive. And we're sitting here talking about how Purdue's greatest fatal flaw all season long was the turnovers. And now we're sitting here talking about, well, Purdue needs to be more aggressive. Well, what's going to happen if you're more aggressive? You're going to turn the ball over more. So I don't know how to think about that, really. I just know that Purdue had to take care of the basketball. Purdue should have been able to get the ball inside more than it did, to Zach-Edey and Travion Williams and get more productivity out of that. If this game was just about getting the ball across midcourt, getting the ball inside to where your biggest advantage lies, that doesn't sound like an unreasonable formula for winning to me. In the context of the fact that turnovers have been Purdue's biggest problem all year long, and if it's just about hanging on to the basketball and not turning the ball over, that's not the worst approach in the world. The fact that you still didn't do it, is obviously regrettable. But I thought Purdue could have been more aggressive, getting the ball into offense a little bit. But I'm also not gonna disregard the fact that if you get a little more productivity from guys you get a lot of productivity from, or if you made a 3-pointer in the second half, you live by the 3, you die by the 3. And if you had just gotten 2 or 3 more possessions, or if you had just not fouled, how many times in the final 5 minutes of the game, in the bonus, allowing St. Peter's to score without attempting a field goal? You could point to anything. I think offensive aggressiveness would be probably 7th or 8th on my list if I had to point to things that were Purdue's problem on Friday night.
50-50 balls were certainly a huge deal, too.
All season long. This was not a great loose ball team. I mean, that offensive rebound at the end of the game was, and I haven't even got back and watched it, so I don't know how Purdue was positioned to get it, but I could point to like a half a dozen loose balls over the course of the whole season. That would be the difference between winning 29 games and Purdue probably winning 33 or 34 and still being playing right now.
Tom, go ahead.
So what's next, Brian? I guess we turn the proverbial page. 6 newcomers next year, a couple red shirts in that group. We know the seniors leaving, the 3 seniors not coming back. Jaden Ivey certainly isn't back. Zach-Edey probably will be. But again, just overarching again, Brian, what's next for Purdue, and maybe give us an idea of what you think or how you think this roster, this team could look moving forward.
Well, it's really hard to say anything definitive right now because obviously, Purdue's going to have to wait out the decision from Zach-Edey. I anticipate him being back. I think it would make a ton of sense for him to come back. But you never know. The one thing I'll say about Zach-Edey, I've seen him many times in the past year or two after practice doing the around the world shooting drill. And he looks good shooting 3-pointers. He looks good shooting jump shots. And you go to an NBA workout, that's the exact workout they're going to put you through. He does that. One team says, hey, you know what? We're going to draft you. You never know. I wouldn't anticipate that happening. I would anticipate him being back, in which case he'd be one of your preseason frontrunners for Big Ten Player of the Year. We'll see who else comes back. Hunter Dickinson, there are a bunch of guys who could still come back who could change that. But I think that that's the biggest thing. Obviously, there is no decision for Jaden Ivey to make. He has to go. He has to go. And I think he is that. that decision has been made already. It's a matter of whenever he makes the announcement. Obviously, none of the seniors are using their COVID years, so they're all gone. So this is going to be a very different roster. It is the transfer era, so the possibility exists you could lose somebody. Who that would be, I don't know, and I don't want to speculate. I don't see any reason to believe absolutely someone's leaving. But you're also going to add guys. And, Matt Painter doesn't want to build teams through the transfer portal, but he's going to have to play the game the same way everybody else is. And they need a guard. They need a ball handling guard. They need a scoring guard. If those two things are the same guy, great. But the caliber of that player is going to really matter for Purdue, because when you look at this backcourt, the front court is top heavy. You've got all kinds of options in your front court, all sorts of moving pieces in your front court. But your backcourt all of a sudden is down to basically Isaiah Thompson, Braden Smith coming in, Fletcher Lawyer coming in, Brandon Newman, and Ethan Morton kind of as that tweener. I don't think I'm forgetting anybody. Brian Waddell is kind of a wing, not really a guard. Plus, he's coming off an ACL injury. So there's going to be a lot of changes here, and the possibility exists you're not going to have a lot of players on campus this spring, because if you lose anybody, that's going to be a couple more bodies out the door, or at least one more body out the door. And I don't have any reason to think they're going to lose anybody at this point, but it's always possible nowadays. If you add somebody, he doesn't get here till June. The freshmen don't get here till June. You're looking at like having half a team on campus this spring. But I think you got to get Saturday back to, not fall off considerably next season. If you can do that, you have somebody you can build a team around. You need Caleb First to take another step as a player. I think he will. I think he can be one of Purdue's better players next year. I think you need Ethan Morton to take another step next season. I think you need these freshmen to come in and help you right away insofar as they can. I don't know if this is necessarily a class that's going to be like the whole Jaden Ivey, Zach Edey group, where those guys were so good so fast. It gave you almost too much this season, too much of a good thing. And it shortened the window for this team to grow together and do something. I don't think that this is that kind of class. I think this is more of a complementary type of class. But they're obviously going to be in a pretty distinct state of transition here. They're going to have to kind of get back to some typical Purdue basics here. They're going to have to take care of the basketball. They're going to have to be better defensively next season than they were this season. I think you have the potential to have some good leadership next season. And I don't know if Purdue had great leadership this year in a traditional sense. In Mason Gillis and some other guys, Ethan Morton, I think, can be a good leader for this team. You just got to redefine yourself now. This is going to be a very, very different team than it was this season. I think it's a little bit unfortunate that, this team didn't have one more year together with Jaden Ivey and whatnot, but that's the nature of recruiting good players sometimes. Jaden Ivey and Zach Edey got so good so fast that this team had a very short window. But it is going to be very different next year. I think Purdue's on solid ground as a program. I think they're going to have good teams every year, some years more so than others. I think next year is going to be one of those years where I think you get back to the tournament. You get in the top of that top tier of the Big Ten, and you build towards something bigger to come thereafter. That would be my general expectation. That would be my general thumbnail on next season, 36 hours after the season ended, not knowing who's even going to be on Purdue's team.
All good questions and all interesting. All right, what do you make of the Big Ten? Obviously, out of the NCAA tournament, you watched a lot of Big Ten basketball up close and personal this year. Michigan and Purdue, the only two teams to make it to the Sweet 16. They both get eliminated. I mean, you seeing, there's conversations about that, but I mean, what do you see from your perspective in terms of that? Is that a fundamental flaw of the league? Something needs to change? How do you view that?
Well, I think you have to be able to score. I think, some Big Ten teams play in a way that they try to beat you 48-45, and that didn't really work for Wisconsin in the NCAA tournament. It worked during the regular season, obviously, but it didn't work in the NCAA tournament. I think Illinois obviously, didn't had a hard time scoring against Houston. I think Michigan State obviously gave Duke a run for its money, but that wasn't a very good offensive basketball team this year relative to past Spartan teams. Obviously, Purdue was one of the best offensive teams, by some metrics in college basketball. Although, I've always said that, we kept referring to Purdue being number one nationally in offensive efficiency when it turns the ball over too much and it misses too many free throws, which seems like the height of inefficiency to me. So I think that label was always kind of a misnomer. But, Purdue scored 64 points against St. Peter's. A lot of that's a credit to St. Peter's, but it just goes to show you that, obviously you have to be able to score points to win, and teams relying more than ever right now on the three-pointer kind of randomizes that as much as possible. Again, I'll go back to the second half. You make one three-pointer, before 8 seconds are left on the clock, you might have seen a different outcome here. But, you live by the three, you die by the three. It's as randomized an element of basketball as there is. And as good as you are shooting the ball, it can always, the bottom can always drop out on you. And between Purdue not being able to make shots and Purdue turning the ball over too much, that's what kept Purdue from, putting 75, 80 points on the board and advancing to the Elite Eight. I guess kind of the moral of the story is you just have to score in the NCAA tournament. And a lot of Big Ten teams, I don't think it's necessarily an offensive league. I think it's kind of like a bumper cars league. And, maybe that kind of catches up with them a little bit. And that's why I thought Purdue was conditioned this year to, be a better NCAA tournament team than a Big Ten regular season team, was that if the game opened up a little more in the NCAA tournament, which obviously it didn't, because St. Peter's was able to bait them into a Big Ten game basically and expose their flaws. But I just never thought this Purdue team was built to win low scoring games for all the reasons I just mentioned, is that they turn the ball over too much. They don't make their free throws. They don't get loose balls as often as they should. And this just wasn't a great little things team. Why that was, I don't know. We will never know. It doesn't matter anymore. What's done is done. But I think a lot of that might apply to the Big Ten, where I think some of these teams just might not be conditioned to, be really good offensively, from Michigan State to Wisconsin. Obviously, Iowa is, but that didn't help them. This postseason, Illinois is kind of more of a physical throw it inside type of team, although they do shoot a lot of threes. That, I guess. I think you have to be able to score to win in March, and I just don't know if the Big Ten was best suited to be able to do that.
All right. One thing good about the world that we live in, I guess, even though there's still among Purdue fans, a mourning period, and this one it's going to take a while for Purdue fans to get over. But we do go on to Purdue football, and Tom.
Real quick, say something to think about. The Big Ten hasn't won a national title since 1999-2000.
Yeah.
Ask yourself this: can you name right now on the NBA who's the best Big Ten player in the NBA? Think about that, and know the Big Ten hasn't had 3 lottery picks since the 1990 NBA draft.
Well, they will this year. So that's
two.
That's what makes it even more confounding about the Big Ten this season.
My point is, I got a son who's a junior in college. He was born after. He's never even seen a Big Ten team win a national championship. And I think bottom line, they don't get the players. They don't get the elite players. You can't even think who's the best Big Ten player in the NBA right now.
I have to think about it for a second.
The fact you have to think about it says it all.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yet,
D'Angelo Russell. I'm trying to think.
D'Angelo Russell.
Yeah.
Yo, there's your answer.
Played 1 year, and I do think of this year. You do have. There'll be Ivy, Davis. Who else will?
Keegan Murray.
We'll all be.
Ivy, Johnny Davis, and Keegan Murray will all be lottery picks. So this year's Big Ten should have just bucked all the trends you just talked about in that regard. If it was about just getting the players, but it didn't.
And Big Ten still flopped.
Yeah. Yep. All right, on to football, Tom. Obviously you got heard from Jeff Brom after scrimmage yesterday. This is now 2 weeks away from the spring game. Usually not overly revealing in terms of what was there, but it sounds like the defense was at least Jeff Brom admitted the defense was a little bit ahead of the offense. You'll be able to be in practice a couple more times to watch them work out. But any great revelations of what you heard from the coach yesterday?
No, again, like you said, Jeff said that the defense sort of had a slight edge on the scrimmage Saturday, and not a big shock. I think the defense is going to be pretty good, guys. It's funny to say that without George Karlaftis being on the team, but I know there's still issues to deal with defensively. But overall, I tell you what, the D-line's got really nice depth. They're still looking for that playmaker, of course. They're not going to find a Karlaftis, but they need some guys or some buddies to sort of be consistent playmakers up front. But they got plenty of depth, can probably legit go at least 2 deep, if not 3 deep at each position up front. The linebacking core, to me, guys, is going to be a strength, even without Jalen Alexander. The secondary, while it's very thin right now, once they get all their guys on deck, Corey Trice, Jamari Brown, they get T. Denson and Marvin Grant. I think the secondary has a chance to be good too. So I expect the defense to be something they could hang their hat on while the offense sort of comes together. The issues on the offensive line remain, guys. It's thin, and it seems like we say that every year. It's got thinner this last week when I learned that one of their redshirt freshman offensive tackles, Jalen Vandervanders, left the team. And once you get beyond the top 5 guys, you probably only have 2 dudes off the bench that have played a significant enough amount where you really feel comfortable putting them in. So there are issues there. That's why they're hitting the portal hard. Supposed to have had 2 guys in to visit, a lineman from Northern Colorado and one from Kent State. And then the running back spot, that's a question mark. We all know they'd like to add somebody there. And 2 guys, the wide receiver position. People look at it and they think, well, they got a lot of good options at wide receiver. But if you really study and look at it, there's still some questions at that receiving core. 4 key guys are out this spring. Milton Wright may not be back as well. So, again, long story short, I guess, to me, there's maybe more questions offensively than defensively right now as we head into the last 2 weeks of spring football.
Yeah. You look at that and see, you made a comment that or wrote about the Purdue, and again, this is part of what we do we're trying to project ahead for Purdue basketball, trying to project ahead for Purdue football, being picked as high as number 2 in the West Division. I know it's extremely early, and that's throwing something out there, but Aiden O'Connell certainly gives you that opportunity if in a division that may not, who knows, I haven't looked at it close enough to know how what teams are going to look like next year, but there certainly is optimism around the program. I mean, there's no question about that, and that there's going to be a lot to be thrown at when Purdue opens up against Penn State. That will be as big a season opener as you're ever going to find for Purdue on that Thursday night on September 1st. Yeah,
it'll be a lot like 2019 or 2018, I guess, that Northwestern game.
But I would say even bigger with Penn State. But yeah,
hopefully the outcome's better this time. But yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. September 1st on Fox, and what we do, guys, we speculate, we project. We're allowed to do that as members of the media, and we'll project away. And again, if you look at that schedule. And if they get by Penn State, there's a chance for a very good start for Purdue. I'll just say that. And it's better than an alternative. There should be a lot of excitement around this team throughout the summer, heading into the fall, I think. Al, you talked about Aiden O'Connell, buddy. Anytime you can trot out a quarterback of that ilk, it give you that swagger. Every time he's on the field, I know there's issues offensively, but you got a chance to win a game with him throwing the football. And the confidence that has to instill in the players, I think, has got to be great. Just having that guy back there. So that's a great starting point for an offense that, like I said, has some questions to answer. So, guys, this is a roster that's going to continue to evolve here as we move forward. I talked about some of the guys visiting the Virginia running back they're trying to get. a smaller kid from Hawaii who's going to be a grad transfer if they can get him. We could see guys added in May. Brock Thompson came aboard last May. Guys throughout the summer. So again, you guys have been doing this as long as me, and in this roster and these new rules, you know that it's very fluid, and they're always looking to add personnel. Maybe even a defensive lineman in the portal, maybe even a wide receiver too. They're not going to take just anybody, obviously, but they have their fit. They know what they're looking for, and it's a lot of fun to watch the pieces get put together here right now, this spring and into the summer for sure.
All right, Brian, as we bring this to a close, what's up for you? I mean, obviously, there's still some basketball post-mortem. You'll have basketball recruiting in April as well, or at least tournaments, et cetera. What's going to – I know things will occupy your time. Maybe just getting it back to West Lafayette will be a good thing. But what's next for you as we put this wrap on this show?
Yeah, I'm still trying to get my $9 back from SEPTA. I haven't really I haven't really put much thought into it. I've still got stuff from after the game. I'll throw together some stories and some not retrospectives, but like some post-mortem on the season. Some looking ahead stuff, obviously. Only so much you can do right now, not knowing who's on the team. But
yeah,
obviously we'll look back, we'll look ahead, all kinds of stuff like that. We'll kind of dive into both football and basketball recruiting here. In the next couple of weeks and find ways to keep busy.
Real quick,
go ahead, Tom.
Just one more thing. Tuesday, March 29th is pro day at Purdue. Yeah. And I'll be there. Our photographer should be there as well. We'll have plenty of coverage coming out of that event. I love the pro day. It's sort of just a glorified gym class, if you will, but it's still fun watching the guys run. And we can watch them do some of their drills. We can't watch them lift weights to do their bench press, but should be a pretty good roster of guys in attendance. Of course, Karloftis and Bell being the headliners. It'll be interesting to see if all 32 teams are there as well. So that's something that's on our radar. Like you said, Alan, we got practice Monday we can attend, and we'll have pro day Tuesday, practice Thursday, and a practice Friday. So football's got a pretty busy week. And then you can believe it, guys, the next week is the final week of spring's football, culminating on April 9th, I believe, with the spring game.
Yeah. Get that.
Are they going to have to climb the rope like in gym class?
Yeah. How about George Karloftis? He's going to run the 40, right? So is that's
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if he's running the 40 or not. No, Brian, but I think instead of the climb the rope, they're going to have a four square competition.
Play kickball.
Yeah, my gym class's biggest fear was square dancing. You guys weren't even old enough to probably have that. We had square dancing in gym class. I didn't like it. I've never been a strong dancer. I think I'm the Julie Louis-Dreyfus version of dancing. But
this is what you do in Indiana in gym class, huh?
You had a. You didn't have that. Did you have that, Tom? I don't know, Brian.
We had a game.
We had. But the key, Alan, was okay if you got a cute girl to dance with, though.
Yeah, that didn't happen enough for me. But you didn't have that in Jersey, huh?
Yeah, we had a game called Steal the Bacon, where you put the baton in the middle of the gym, and then half the class lined up on one line, and half the class lined up on the other line.
Capture the flag.
We did to Cheese Cum or whatever it was called.
The ultimate kind of Hunger Games type of thing, because when you get there at the same time, it was on, and it was basically just American Gladiators for that baton.
The other one was when they got the parachute out. He did the parachute thing. Remember that?
No, we did the parachute. Well, no one worried about suffocation or anything like that. We just went on. We just moved on. All right. We have to in moments like this, you got to have some levity. Life is moving on. We will move on as goldenblack.com. And I'm privileged to work with Brian and Tom as we have that opportunity to do so. Thank you all for watching, listening. As Brian always says on the end of his rap videos, what is the term you use? However you use that. Yeah. Consume our stuff.
However it is you process our materials.
Process. That's the word you use. Process our materials. We appreciate that on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, wherever it is, and also on that site, goldenblack.com. We're grateful for you. I want to also say we're grateful for the Union Club Hotel. We will continue our Saturday conversations throughout the spring and summer. We'll maybe talking about gym class. We could talk about we don't cover Purdue baseball, but the Boilermakers are 18-1 now and ranked 17th in the country, and somehow are going to play today in West Lafayette, I guess. Even though the wind chill's 20 degrees, but they're supposedly going to play Ohio State this afternoon. So anyway, there'll be a lot to talk about as we move into the off season and off season, at least in terms of football and basketball. So thank you all for watching and listening. Have a great week, and we'll look forward to talking to you next week on our Saturday Simulcast. Have a good week, everybody.